grew up in a place called Numarella, which was 4 miles out of August, where I was born, town, in 1943. There were 7 siblings in our family, and then my father died when I was 10. But the community that I grew up with were mostly first and second cousins, mostly related through my mother's brothers and sisters, which were my granduncles and grandaunties. Quite a few other transient Aboriginal people that used to come from Lake Tyers, 40 miles west of us on the highway going to Melbourne. And I remember times visiting Lake Tyers as a young kid when my father was alive, mostly funerals that my father knew and the people that we knew, and my mum knew also. My mum was born at Lake Tyers. Lived in Melbourne in the teenage days, in the early 20s. She met my father then. They got married then, of course. But growing up as a young kid in Numarella, in my primary school days, it was just more or less a normal relationship with white kids and also my cousins. There was no cultural upbringing in relation to what I found out years later, even though I knew I was Aboriginal, and most of my white mates I went to school, we didn't distinguish ourselves above the other in any cultural sort of things. We just grew up as mates. And I lived a very prominent, good childhood. I had an extended family that never, that was there all the time. I had, in Melbourne, I remember coming to Melbourne when I was only 4 and 5. And my extended family of my mother's sisters, all brothers, or my uncles, of course, and aunties, they were very strong in relation to keeping an eye on us. And of course, I was just learning then, at around about 9 or 10, when the welfare system was a very, very cruel sort of system, which I found out years later. But I was a very protected family. I never got caught in any welfare problems. Uncles and aunties always protected me when I wasn't living at home or wasn't at home. And when I grew up in my primary school days, that's at the up to grade 5, our teacher was a very prominent. He was very aware of the problems of Aboriginal people and the governments of the day, but we didn't know that in a sense of being told that, but there was always that protective thing about the way he taught us. When I was around about 22, 23, I started to see change in different jobs I had. I was to be a seasonal bean picking days. After my mum, she went to sea change 2 years after, or 3 years after my father died, and met up with another partner. My stepfather, George, his name was also. And we settled on the south coast in Narooma. And that's when I got interested in fishing. And I started on the fishing boats when I was only 13. I didn't finish my high school matriculation and things like that. When we left Victoria, I didn't go to school over there. I went straight into the workforce, especially fishing. And 3 years before that, we was doing seasonal itinerant work on the beans, peas, potatoes, corn, whatever, what's in seasonal times. But when I started to get into my 20s, I started to be aware of what was going on, especially at the time when little bits of newspaper things and radio things that I'd pick up on the boat, and also going home and at times at Christmas time, and just sort of been told a little bit about culture, not so much as what I did when I first came to Melbourne. And that's when I met one of my eldest auntie's husband, Eric Onus. He was a very prominent friend of Sir Pastor Nichols at the time, and that's how I come to really get a good window view of what culture was happening at the time under Uncle Doug and doing a lot of voluntary work. Well, it was a whole turning point of myself. I mean, I grew up, in a way, I was a very happy kid in my childhood. And when I looked back at what culture came, it sort of did confuse me in a lot of ways because of the set aims and objectives that you had to protocol to do with culture. Even when Welcome to Country, that came later in the years in the early 80s when first land rights were started to come about, it sort of replaced my my style of growing up into a more responsible way to look at myself as an Aboriginal person. Well, I guess the various organisations that I started to join and work with, I was very fortunate to see Sir Pastor Nichols in the last 10 years before he passed away, and what he done, and that inspired me a lot. Of my uncle, who I stayed with in Preston during the 60s. I remember doing some corroborees that he inaugurated us, and that was out of the Bacchus Marsh Lions Park. And it was quite an involvement with other Aboriginal people around Melbourne, which I never knew were culturalised sort of people. Me being a bit more darker than the average Aboriginal person I met at that time, I felt that I was more or less in the limelight because of my colour. I never knew a great deal about our local culture. And then I met one of the guys from Northern Church when he first came down. He was only 17 or 16 or 17 or in his 20s, David Gulpel. And that was a culture shock to me, to know that that was the ancestry of my people down this end of the world well before I was born. I'd say I'd be around about 22, 23 years of age. I was watching the development of the referendum at that time, being associated with the giants of yesterday who were the pioneers of the referendum, like Faith Bandler, Uncle Doug Nichols, Stuart Murray. There were so many people involved, Alan Jacomos, of course. And then at that time, there was some Aboriginal movement with the local Fitzroy community, which I was very involved with on a social basis. On the social basis, growing up in Fitzroy during my time I was working part-time with the League and Advancement League. I knew Uncle Doug's movements of how the Advancement League was developing. I started to learn about my father's history then, and also what part he played before he met my mum when he came to Melbourne back in the 30s. And I saw a place where I could be an asset to being a leader as a cultural talker. Well, my first indication of learning to be a leader was being on a pedestal because of the many other people that I was working under or working around, and I felt a great need to learn about wealth to country. I also had a great need to know the various tribal groups throughout Victoria. I was a cultural officer for the one particular organisation, the Wiradjuri, there for a couple of years. It was a great learning ground for me to learn more how Wiradjuri came about, what its history was, which was unbroken lineage to the present day today. My culture for myself came in when land rights came in, and through my great-grandparents, who were the recipients of the first, one of the first sort of lot of people on the Aboriginal mission, which was Lake Tyers today. Looking back, I needed to know what my role as a culture talker, because of my history on myself. Of course, when the Northern Territory came about, I was very fortunate to run into Vincent Lagani when he came down to Melbourne with the Vesties walk-off, and I was there at the right place at the right time. This is through the Advancement League, of course, because I had to do a lot of voluntary on and off. Mind you, I was a professional fisherman in between those times, which was seasonal. So at any given time, I'd be out of our community from October up till April the following year. Well, the first impact of the leader was Uncle Dud Nichols, and then my uncle, my mother's elder sister, Auntie Winnie, her husband, Eric Onus, who was the brother to Bill Onus, who was a very prominent entrepreneur in Aboriginal artefacts and culture. And also Stuart Murray later on here at the Advancement League. The various directors that came through the Advancement League, like Elizabeth Hoffman, of course the present day now to Esme Bamblett. And of course I was greatly influenced through the role of what Alf Bamblett played in our community and what his vision was, and it's such a very glorious thing to know today that we have the truth about what he was, what he stood for, and the legacy that he has given us today. And with all that particular understanding about these men and their roles, I developed my self-appointed being an Aboriginal culture officer. And I developed a lot of things like the history of the Advancement League when I'd go and talk. I'd do a lot of university students, a lot of primary schools, a lot of kindergartens. I think all told, since the time I look back up to 2000, from the year 2000 and backwards, I've done around about nearly 1,100 different kindergartens, and that's including part of New South Wales, mostly a lot of regional parts of Victoria, including Melbourne, of course, more central, and that's still ongoing today. There's so many topics about Aboriginal histories, you need to be a Philadelphian lawyer to put it all together, but I seem to have a lot of physical contact with the people that developed these particular organisations. I was very fortunate to, as I said, from the referendum up till the Yorta to the Native Title Assembly and the voice of, it's the same sort of impact that I'm never stop learning. Well, I was very gifted with the gum leaf, the way I play, which I'm very passionate about still today. And that was a great interest to the public that I'd be speaking to, especially our Aboriginal communities. And I've learnt a lot out of myself from what I did understand. Anybody that asked me, oh, what happened, can you tell us a little bit about the Mabo issue? And I know that. Can you tell me a little bit, who was the first organisation here in Melbourne? Well, the Advancement League was one of the pioneer organisations of the many hundreds of organisations that came later. My interest in my public speaking was to talk about the development of our Aboriginal people became from flora and fauna days to being counted in the census, and also those histories leading up. I mean, even when the 1901 Federation came in, I can understand how the constitutional purpose stood out and what it stood for. And the thing that I was always at the back of my mind, that I had to live in two worlds. I had to live in my old self, which I didn't know much about my cultural background until things developed from around about 1980 onwards. But for the new self that I looked at, there were sort of two type of journeys that I was travelling. I was travelling in one foot from what I did learn and what I learnt out of that from a cultural connection, and then the other foot just being a person and being an asset to modern day, because most of the self-appointed jobs that I did out and doing cultural talk was, I'd say about 70% of it would be non-Aboriginal people I'd be talking to. First of all, respect. Now, respect covers such a broad field of how you go about it. Like when I used to go to the land rights marches, the early land rights marches, and even up to today, I didn't like swearing, and I voiced my self-opinion about the chanting things that were happening on the march. I did have a little bit of a place on the podium in the, especially in the 70s, alongside other speakers at that time. And I found that you got to be truthful and sincere about what you're saying. So for any young people that I meet today, I said, you got to get to know your history of yourself, why you're there, why you're an Aboriginal person, what makes you an Aboriginal person, even though you've got white parents or one partner's white. That doesn't stop you from being the Aboriginal part of you. I found that a lot in later years, and I'm still finding out today, that there's always room for developing and talking about their histories, especially when I understood where Stolen Generation came about. I was very lucky to be part of the Bringing Them Home report committees, also the early reconciliation committees. I was involved in that. So there's a lot of things for a young person today to develop himself as a prominent good Aboriginal community leader. And of course, the whole thing about each program as you go along is to sustain that respect and on the type of cultural areas that you're speaking with. I'm still learning, believe it or not, I am still learning. I'm involved now with some very prominent traditional people from the different parts of the Northern Territory because my ongoing commitment to a particular role I play with the mental health program through our services, what we call Wiradjuri at the Royal Children's Hospital. And it's been a very, very rewarding part of my ongoing cultural learning. And of course, with all the history of myself through what I mentioned from the referendum days up to now. Yes, growing up as a young person today, I've emphasised to tell them to respect your history of your family, both sides, white or black. Also to study as much as you can about the history of development of many Aboriginal organisations and how they came about and what they stand for. Getting into the political field, it's a very confusing sometimes because social media today seems to have a lot of problematic answers, and don't believe everything you hear. That's what I was told once. I said, be careful what you believe in, especially when you're involved with the Aboriginal people in themselves, or even for some of the people in politics that are up there on the podium in the forefront. And that helped me tremendously because I gave me time to take a breath, think what I'm going to say, and why I should say it. So that helped me to understand that particular way of addressing myself to the public, white and black.